program. It is Saturday, June 10. Deja, we already. Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. That's why we solidify the bonds that we share as Dominicans. L'union spéciale identité. What is on fire today will serve a good bouillon. More like a cool bouillon. I wonder if Nigel has had any cool bouillon before. Come over, Nigel. Good morning to you.
Good morning, my dear. I trying to organize something there.
Okay.
I was doing I was cooking something in the pot there.
You were cooking.
So I come in. Hold on there.
Okay, all right. So my co-host Nigel Francis and I, we have a guest, a special guest, as I told you before. We started this program in 2020. It was on the 14th of November. And we have spoken to so many people already. The plan is to expand the program even more. Okay, Nigel, are you ready?
Let's roll. It will
Nigel.
fix itself as we go along.
Something is not working well for me this morning, but I'm going to calm down. I'm going to count to 1 to 10,
That's the whole
Nigel.
idea. That's the whole
Because
idea.
I'm sure you realize the vibes, but let's see how it goes. Nigel.
We'll make it happen.
Yeah, man. How you doing?
I'm good. It's Saturday. We're connecting. It's good. I'm here.
Yeah.
Week was a little tough, but I'm here and ready to roll. I had a little flu for the week though. I don't know what this little thing was. Little sniffles was troubling me a little bit, but I'm good.
Nigel, but you should take some Vicks. And the other things, Tabaxorbi and things like that.
Yes. That's what they tell me I should have been taking, but I was waiting for the package to arrive.
Okay, all right. So
But,
I was late.
Took a little while. Yeah,
I was late.
I know you told me you were going to send it, but so it took a little while, but I'm here.
My fault. But Nigel, you ever had a kubuyo with the right ingredients? And then you drink a glass of lime squash with the pulp and the seeds in it, or everything in one?
You say the thing, not squash, the squash.
The squash. Okay, the squash.
Yes. When you have a kubuyo and then you put a lime juice, the lime is as a squash you drink in there. Yes. That's what they say.
Agree.
But yes, kubuyo does come down really well. And especially when it's done the right way with the right ingredients.
I tell you, Nigel.
And then you put it in the bowl,
And then you feel like sleeping, or you burst asleep in local palace, as they would
you
say.
You have no choice. You
Because
have to fall asleep after that. Yes, you have absolutely no choice.
Yes, the heat comes on, you start to sweat, and you can, hardly move. You feel like a Titanic, and you're scared that you will sink.
And depending on what area in the country you're from, you have a nice cool breeze blowing, so you have no problem. You just have to fall asleep right there.
Right there. Oh boy, Nigel.
Right there.
And you remember that small fish we had, like cha-cha, and also there was, I think, kai and tikuleu, fish like that. And green bananas before, they were tasty, huh? And it was easy to get fei dashin. No boy, look, I'm getting hungry already, we? Best to bring another guest, man. Yes.
I was about to tell you, normally you tell me about breakfast and all what you eat gonna have for breakfast. Now you're telling me about kubuyo. You put him in a lunch mood.
Well, Nigel, somebody felt that too often I'm maybe hungry around that time. I don't know why, if it's because of how I talk at that time. So they brought me some fasheen with some cucumbers and some other stuff like boiled eggs and what is this again?
You have the works. You have the works today.
Salt fish and the works. So I'll see. I'll pass on some to you later. But Nigel, how was the week though? Before we move on to our guest, how was the week?
Week was all right. Work-wise, we battled through the work as we always do. So on a Friday evening, I'm like, take a deep breath and stuff, get ready for the weekend, and still have to go into work now and then. But week was good. I was happy. I got happy yesterday, when I was able to see our young guy, Alec Athanas, doing what he did, and yes,
we
and
have to
coming in the history books.
Yeah, man. I tell
You
you.
know,
And he has equaled what, Nigel? The fastest ODI half
yes,
century
the
on his debut.
fastest ODI half century in his debut. You know,
And he's,
and
setting a
those
world
and that was
record.
held by two Indian guys. So it's good to know that I mean, Dominic and Alec Athenas and has placed himself in the history
Oh,
books,
yes. Oh, yes.
as equaling that record and having
Man.
that record now for the fastest half century one ODIs on debut.
He was
So
knocking at the door for
congratulations
so
to the
long.
young man.
He was knocking at the door. We also have to congratulate Kavim
And
Hodge for
Calvin
letting
Hodge
his
as
light
well.
shine as well. Yeah, it's good. I mean, when you understand that there was so much insularity, and there still is, but just the fact that we have Alec Athenas on the team, that speaks wonders for us as a small island developing state. So
It
kudos
does, it does,
to
it
Alec
does. And I
Athenas.
know that our guest had written it has
Oh
one of his
yes,
books,
we had to look at that.
concerning cricket.
Yes, a
So I'm
lot, a
pretty sure
lot.
that yes, he'll have his 2 cents to say about that. But I mean, it's good that and at the same time, it's also sad too because here we are in 2023, and having to congratulate Alec Cathenas and talking about insularity of cricket, of West Indies cricket after all those years. So it still says that although we congratulate him, it still says that there's a lot to be done on
Oh
West Indies cricket,
yes,
ensuring that there's
a
greater
lot. I
participation
agree. I
and
agree.
contribution. Yes, yes, yes,
I
yes.
agree. There's a lot that has to be done, but we can say "bad bravo." I would say it
Oh
in the Creole
yes,
term.
yes, and we shall do that for a while. And we wish him many more, records to be broken, but we wish him a lot more success.
Yes. Okay.
Both he and Captain.
Definitely. So before we go on, let me just tell you quickly: the reading competition is on still. DBS Radio organizing this, spearheading the event. And so we have ended the first round. So we had 6 groups in the first round. We have ended this. And next week, we will move on to the semi-final round. So we have 3 rounds in the semi-finals, and then we will have the grand finals. So it's going nicely, Nigel. Just wanted you to know.
Nice, nice, nice. I'm happy to hear that. I was able to catch a couple of them during the week. Did I miss the one where the Monjon school participated? I was trying to make sure that Alias and them listened. I'm not sure if they did.
Okay.
But it's good to know that, and I'm happy that it's continuing. So we want to wish the students continued success on that. When are the finals due for?
The finals are due for very early in July.
July, okay.
That time, early in July, we have the finals, and then we'll have the prize giving ceremony the week later. So yes.
Nice. DBS continuing to do what it has to do.
Definitely, and we remember the late Felix Henderson, who really spearheaded this initiative back in the day. It's 13 years now since we are holding this. Of course, we have had about 2 breaks. COVID-19 reared its ugly head, and we had to hold back. But we are moving full-fledged, Nigel, with this competition, which is so very important. Very, very important.
It is,
Yeah.
and I mean it's an avenue for young people to improve their reading skills and the presentation and public speaking and so on. Something that's not very popular, if you want to put it these days. So it's good that we can have that program. DBS can have that to ensure they can continue improving the skills of our students.
Sure. All right. So Nigel, we have a guest. So
I
went to open the door for my guest, but I think he's looking so much younger. I don't know. It was something. He'll have to tell us why. Nigel. But it's really,
we'll find out.
Yes,
if it's Booyah water or something else,
yes.
but yes.
It is certainly a pleasure, Nigel, to welcome our guest this morning. Irving André is his name, but it's important that we give him his proper handle, as they would say in local palace. Give the man his handle, Justice Dr. Irving André. He's, of course, a legal luminary, a writer, social activist, a family man, and so much more. It is really his story to tell, Nigel, and we know that too well, that Dr. André can tell his story from boyhood days to where he is now. So, Nigel, I look forward to a very, very, very interesting discussion. He's by no means laconic, so he'll talk and he'll express himself well. Nigel, I'm sure that you two are looking forward to this interesting discussion.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm very much looking forward to having this discussion with Dr. Irving André, Irving, whatever you call him, in terms of those who know him. But certainly looking forward to this particular discussion and to share and to learn and to have that level of interaction like we always do. Of course, a little humor in between here, because I know as a writer, he has that quality as well. So it's a pleasure to have him. Before we bring him on very quickly, always say good morning to all our students, all those who logged in on Facebook, our Facebook family. Alvin Thomas, good morning to you. I know you've been on very early. That's a good thing because you were late last week, but you were excused. But it's good to have you. Hey, Kofi, greetings. Great to have you on as well. Congratulations on your daughters on their graduation and so on and so on. Tina Etienne Nation, good morning to you. Al Binwa, good morning. Winnie Green, Glenda Shillingford, Fado, good morning. All those in Houston who had a great Memorial Day weekend picnic, good morning to you. So, Facebook, we're ready to roll, right?
Of course. Nigel, we are ready.
All right.
We are ready to roll. So how do we begin? Do you have something to welcome Dr. Irving André? How do you welcome someone like this?
You might, I'm not sure if you can tell, I had to move studios this week in a different location. I'm in Studio 4. So I don't have anything around me, but I will do, what can we do? I think we will just welcome Dr. Irving André.
Okay.
Justice Irving André. I don't see him yet. Oh, you haven't put him on camera yet? No? Okay. All right.
Well, I hope
I seen you and I seen me, but it's okay. But let's say welcome. Welcome. Oh, here he is. You said he was looking young. I thought you were going to say he's looking younger.
Like a gentitash.
Yeah.
Do we use those terms when we talk to someone like Dr. Justice André? Or do we have to be very polite? We should be polite, obviously.
We're always polite.
No, but we are always,
but we're always very connecting in what we do and very open. So it's okay if you say that to him, I think, you know.
Yes.
But Justice Irving André, good morning to you. It's a pleasure. Welcome to Connecting the Dots. Connecting the Dots. It's nice to have you on. We appreciate it from the very beginning. Thank you for accepting the invitation. And good morning.
Good morning to you. Good morning to you, Nigel. Good morning to Ivona. Good morning to your listeners. Although I'm not very familiar with this studio, I must say that I'm quite familiar with both of you, Nigel. I'm familiar with your works. When Alwyn Bully took on a UN position in the early 80s, many persons thought that the theater scene would fall on hard times, that we would enter a kind of metaphorical desert period. But thanks to people like yourself, Steve Hyacinth, afterwards Alex Bruno and others, I don't know who has filled that void. Unfortunately, you left Dominica after writing a few plays to go to so-called the proverbial greener pastures. But you certainly made a significant contribution. I had occasion to review some of your plays in a book I wrote a couple of years ago called Distant Voices, the Revised Edition. And I certainly hope that you are still involved in some way or the other in creative writing. I think it is very important. And I know that, you know, the biblical admonition that to those who have been given great talent, it would be almost a crime to see it strewn on barren soil. So I hope certainly you continue doing what you've been gifted to do.
Nigel, take a ball. Will Nigel? Wow, that's a good way to start the program.
Well, I did hear him talk about cooking, but I would rather think that he used that word in a metaphorical sense. Because if you cook in one pot, everything in one pot, then in my view, you join my ranks because although obviously your cooking, although very pleasing to the taste, may not be as great as the cooking of other persons and so on. But whatever works for you is all good.
It's all good. Wow,
appreciate it. Appreciate it. And yes, the writing continues. Of course, you know, with COVID, that there was a little halt here, but we are in the process of continuing to, do productions. And I'm not sure if you've had. Probably we may have at some point. The last production that we did was something that was called Love Knows No Boundary, which is actually a Caribbean musical version of Romeo and Juliet.
No, I haven't seen
and it actually looks at the two families, Romeo and Juliet's family, and what I have done with it is to have it as two different political parties, and utilize all of that and some of the music of the Caribbean and so on. So the work continues, and hopefully we can get it across to as many people as we can. But thank you for that.
Good.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good way to start. And it's obvious, Nigel, that that name, Dr. Irving André, has long been synonymous with legal work and writing, but there's a lot more that we want to find out. We have heard a lot from him. He has given his opinion on many issues recently. He's a straight shooter. So today we want to find out who is this gentleman. Was he born in Dominica or born in another country to parents of this nature island? There's so much that we want to know. So Nigel, let's begin. You'll start off.
Yeah, we begin as we always begin, from the very beginning, from the Genesis. So, Dr. Justice Irving André, all three together. Before we had that.
I think he's saying something, Nigel. Let's just hear him.
Yeah, before you continue, I would feel much better if you just say Irving.
That's what I was about to say.
It's almost as if you are quavering me when you use those two
Hey, but Nigel, he can speak the Creole, man.
I was about to say, before we got to that point, with those various titles and distinctions, which is well deserved, I was going to ask in terms of Irving, as we always do for our guests, where did it all start in terms of, what part of Dominica are you from? And then we wanted to just look at a little bit about the childhood and what it was like growing up then before we get to there. So tell us a little bit about Irving back then.
Oh, absolutely. And let me indicate that I was born in Curacao. My parents were Dominicans. Historically, as you may know, thousands of West Indians, British West Indians, migrated to Curacao as a result of a policy signed by the British, the Dutch, and the U.S., wherein the British agreed that they would use citizens of their colonies to go to Curacao to provide labor in the oil industry in support of the war effort. So my father, who was born in Lagon, Portsmouth, and my mother, who migrated to Curacao in the late 40s, my father went on about 1943. They went to Curacao and they did what hundreds of Dominicans did. They went to seek a better life. They went to probably improve their lot in life. And they had 7 children altogether, and 5 of us were born in Curacao. They returned to Dominica in 61. I lived in Portsmouth from 61 to on about 69 when I went to the grammar school. And then in 71, my folks built a home in Goodwill. And I lived there until 78 when I moved to Jamaica in search of higher education. So to that extent, my parents are of Dominican origin. My sensibilities have been shaped by Dominican experience. And even today, my primary focus outside of the thing I do to earn a living, to be like the Nigel Francises and to be like the Ivona John Baptists of this world, I earn a living through that, but it enables me to extend, to explore as best as I can or excavate as best as I can the history of Dominica in its myriad forms and in its myriad manifestations. So, give that information. You can describe me in any fashion that you choose. That really doesn't matter. But quite frankly, my preoccupation is with this small sceptred isle, which in my view has so much to give and which in my view can be developed so much more.
Nigel, I'll not be saying much today, so you do the talking. I'm going to listen a lot. I like when a writer speaks. I mean, I know he's a, He's
as a writer yourself, you can join the party.
I want to listen to him carefully, every word that he says. So Nigel, we have some more questions in terms of his upbringing, how he started, what school he went to.
I mean, in terms of...
I hope he's not going to say that he went to the St. Mary's Academy, although I did my research. And anyway,
it's a good question. I'll talk about that later. Yes.
Go ahead, Nigel.
But in terms of the early childhood, growing up in that community, what was it like? What, in terms of maybe some of the activities that you got involved in then?
Well, I can tell you, growing up in Portsmouth was an exceptional experience. I went to the Portsmouth Government School. Well, before that, I went to a kindergarten school called Teacher Rosabelle School. That was an institution in Portsmouth. The head teacher, well, the only teacher was Teacher Rosabelle Wallace. She died on about 1971. And somewhat of a legend of a teacher in her time. I think she started teaching on about 1923 or thereabouts. I did a short bio of her some time ago. And she basically taught us the 4 hours, a number of rhymes, which in later life we found out distilled some important experience about growing up and about dedication to a cause, about trying to exploit whatever skills and whatever aptitudes that you had. And then I moved on to the Dominica Grammar School. I believe at one point the head teacher was the father of Lockhart Sebastian. Now, I later met Lockhart Sebastian in the grammar school. He was in an older form than me. And I knew he was a Sebastian because his father usually had a very big back pocket with a big fat wallet. And young Lockhart Sebastian had the same type of trait. But suffice it to say, it was a great experience growing up in Portsmouth. I remember distinctly that during wet days we would walk to 1 mile. It is now 1 mile agricultural station. And we would liberate, that's the best way I can put it. We would liberate mangoes from huge mango trees and come down, and we would play in the Benjamin's Park, quite frankly. And Portsmouth, as you know, well, hopefully you know, back then, was a very significant regional shipping destination. There were a number of sea captains in Portsmouth, some from Portsmouth, some from Antigua and elsewhere. And they would come, schooners, and the young boys would dive on the jetty into the sea. And we would talk about diving to the bottom of the sea to take sand, to see who could dive the deepest and so on. And during that time, I mean, there was you were not aware of any class distinctions, any social distinctions. You were just aware of a unified experience in that town, where Dominicans lived an idyllic life, free from any kind of animosity, any kind of division, just united by a sense of euphoria, united by a sense that they've been blessed with a town where up north, in the shadow where this Moroccan hotel is, villagers would go to hunt crabs. And in the morning, there would be a knocking on the door. We lived in a modest house, 3-bedroom house. And you'd have some of the crab hunters with crocus bags filled with crabs, and my father would pay for half a bag or a bag, and they would put it in a little watering thing in the back of the yard, and we would go and see these big, huge crabs and avoid their gundies and so on. But that was just one aspect of growing up, and the young boys would play marbles, these marble circles and so on, and see who would emerge the best. And what would happen is occasionally when these yachts and schooners come to Portsmouth, you would see some of the young folks, those particularly whose parents had not been fortunate enough to find government jobs, many of whom worked as not stevedores and as banana carriers. Sometimes they would disappear for months. They would get gigs on these schooners, on these yachts and so on, and come back wearing very flashy clothes, and that would inspire others to seek to do the same. And we didn't appreciate then the kind of difficult lives which banana carriers and stevedores, but we would see these long lines of women, particularly women, the banana carriers, at transshipment point south of the town, just south of Lago, called the Longhouse. Called Longhouse, and you see these women with the little things on their heads, carrying bananas to the lighters, and you would see them rushing back to take another one because they were paid based on the number of bunches of bananas they carried, not by the hour and so on. And then we didn't experience, or we didn't appreciate the difficult, the difficult life that they experienced. It's only later, probably in the 70s, with the growth in consciousness generated by the Black Power movement, that we started to have a better appreciation of the kind of class structure that governed the lives of so many of us. But suffice it to say that growing up in the town, exposed to those experiences, you had a fulsome perspective on life, and you realized, quite frankly, that after going to the Portsmouth Government School, that you had an obligation to try to qualify to go to the secondary school in Roseau. There was a teacher who used to tell us, you have to work hard to go to the white man's school, because the grammar school, the convent high school, was still known, because bear in mind, the grammar school was started in 1892, obviously by the British, based on the public school system in England. And the basic tenet of philosophy of the school is that only the brightest and perhaps only the well-heeled, socially speaking, should enter its portals. So that was a goal. That goal was almost insurmountable for many of us. But I was fortunate. I say fortunate because sometimes we often think that those who occupy positions of power, they do so because of the their superiority because of their superior intelligence. And quite frankly, growing up, we learn to appreciate that in life, there are very intelligent people who never had the ability or the chance to go to secondary school. Not because they were lazy, not because they were not intelligent enough, but circumstances conspired to ensure that they did not go. And hence, as we proceed in life, we learn to get a greater appreciation and a sense of who you are. That you're not here because somehow you are some superior being. You're not here because somehow you are part of the talented 10th. You're here because the stars were more fully aligned in your favor than some of the very people you grew up with.
Excellent. Ivona, excellent. One of the things Ivona and I always talk about is that there seem to have been, I guess, in the 60s, 70s, even towards a little bit of the 80s, but more the 60s and the 70s, where the community seemed to have had a collective responsibility to raise the child.
That's right.
That it didn't matter too much about who the parents were, but the community actually became the parents. Did you experience that as well during that time?
You are quite right. I can give you two experiences. One in particular. My father went to the grammar school. And my father went to the grammar school from 38 to 43, not because of his father's wealth. His father was a man of means. His father owned an estate in Portsmouth. He was a road supervisor. He went to Harrison College in Barbados on account of his father's wealth. But my father was the proverbial outside child. He went to the grammar school because in 38 he won a special administrator's scholarship. That's why he went. And after he graduated, because he got a second grade in the senior Cambridge examinations as opposed to a first grade. All he could muster, and was not a scholarship, quite frankly. In fact, his classmates or the persons who excelled a little better than him at the time in that year was Dr. Edward Watty and Dr. McIntyre, the late Dr. McIntyre, who won the Allen Scholarship. But because of controversy, which I wouldn't go into at this point, Dr. Watty received the scholarship, and both of them studied medicine in the States. My father, as you know, his fate was defined by the circumstances dictated by the war. In late 43, you had labor recruiters coming from the British West Indies to recruit Dominican workers to go to Curacao. There were three classifications of possible laborers: those who had gone to the grammar school, or those who was already working in the service, those who had gone to primary school, and another category of persons who had some skills in some types of trades and so on. My father was one of those recruited to go. And it is as a result of that experience, he did go to Curacao, and certainly by Dominican standards. I mean, persons like himself earned 4 to 5 times what they would have earned in Dominica. I should indicate that he did work in the civil service for about 6 months. He was actually stationed in Grand Bay, but he felt that he had to join that wave of students. So he went to Curacao. It was a great experience for people like himself. I actually wrote a book about the Curacao experience. And in fact, 2 years ago, the Jewish Museum in Willemstad, Curacao, actually contacted me and had me do a webinar to Curaçaoans who hadn't known about the experiences and, quite frankly, the discrimination experienced by British West Indians in Curacao. So my experience is I am the proud beneficiary of a number of influences. But here is something I started saying, and I diverted. And it illustrates the point you're making in terms of the village, in terms of the community believing that they have a role to play in your own progress. When I grew up in Portsmouth, there was a curfew, a curfew imposed by the community. Young children under the age of probably 13 or 12 had to be in by 6. And I can't remember why I was out by 6, but a police officer actually saw me, took me by the scruff of my shirt or neck or whatever, and literally forced me to go home. And I, young, naive, I started saying to him, and I hope you don't mind if I say exactly what I said to him more than once, "Let me go, I want to pee-pee." He never let me go. He marched me right to my home. But you see, he felt that he had a stake in this young fellow, and not just me, quite frankly, but in others. And I remember certainly at the government school, the teachers I made reference to you what this fellow, a fellow called Neil Joseph, I think he's now deceased, would pound into our heads. You have to work harder to get into the white man's school. There was a sense that we had an obligation to fulfill whatever promise that we had. And I think that certainly my generation of students, because I met many brilliant students at the Dominica Grammar School, I can tell you right now, many of them were activated, they were animated and motivated by the same overarching belief that you have now an obligation to push the envelope, to try to succeed as best as you can. Because let's face it, right up into the 1970s, there was only one island scholarship. And those of us, very few of us, I don't know about you, Nigel, I know that you have some illustrious, well, at least one sister, brother, probably more, who've done very well for themselves. But your ability to transgress, to go beyond grammar school or convent high school or Wesley High School or PSS was based on the sacrifices you made to try to ensure that you get the best possible grades to enable yourself to win some type of scholarship. I was fortunate to have won a USAID scholarship after I finished the sixth from college. But the whole notion of your parents being able to give you a scholarship was virtually non-existent. It was perhaps existent for about 10% of the student population. You had to do it by the sweat of your brow. Or if your father was, or your parents, I keep saying your father, but your parents were well enough in terms of owning a property. Some of them perhaps had sufficient property that they could have taken a mortgage to enable to finance you to go to school. But many of us, not all of us, but many of us were able to move to regional institutions or international institutions because we had this vision that somewhere out there lay a field of dreams that would enable us to fulfill our own dreams.
Nigel, you realize I'm sitting, right? Probably it's the first time I'm sitting in the program.
Yes.
Well, you started by dancing, and I was wondering why is it?
You're in class.
Why she's dancing? Because there's a big sign out there saying "Besiba prohibited in all circumstances."
No, Nigel, but seriously, I'm in class. I mean, I'm listening to Dr. André, and even how he speaks, his articulation and everything, Nigel. And I'm remembering how he said when he was looking at growing up, his childhood days, how they would liberate the mangoes from the huge mango trees. And that's a writer. And, he said that there was a time when Dominicans lived an idyllic life. I really love this. So, Nigel, as I said, I'll sit and I'll listen today.
You sit in class?
Yes, I'm in class. class. Taking notes.
So let's transition a little bit, Irving, from you moving from the Portsmouth Government School there, I guess primary school setting, and then heading to secondary school, having to move to Roseau. What was that experience for you like, and maybe for others who would have had to make that journey from Portsmouth to Roseau into a new environment, a new setting, and of course now being in high school? What was it like?
Great question. Let me indicate, before I go on, let me just indicate that I was very fortunate that my parents were dedicated to having their children attain a secondary education. On about 1970-71, I was one of seven, number 4, neither here nor there, stuck in the middle, invisible to all. But my parents had 5 of us, not just in secondary school, but paying the fees of the hostel at the Dominica Grammar School hostel and the Convent High School hostel, while my father, who had transitioned to Roseau, lived at a camp on or about the old Carib Cinema, right in one of those buildings and so on, and he would stay there, and every month he would go down, and my mother and my 2 last siblings were in Portsmouth. And when I reflect on that, I can appreciate the sacrifice, financial and other sacrifices, made to ensure that we had an opportunity to attain a secondary education. And that is why I think it's so important and imperative that the generation after us understand that education is the be-all and the end-all. And that message is even more paramount today because there's so many avenues to pursue what are false hopes and dreams of becoming rich by shortcuts to success. It never works, and it always, unfortunately, end up with the same type of disastrous consequence. I was 9 years as a defense lawyer, and I've seen many hearts broken. And all too often, Nigel and Ivona, it's the mothers. It's the mothers who bear the emotional responsibility of having to go to the assistance of their child who run afoul of the law on account of missing that valuable message or lesson that was literally pounded into our heads while we grew up. So I was fortunate that certainly the question of going to secondary school was not a choice. It was almost a destiny. And the philosophy was this: to the extent that you have no mental impairment, to the extent that you don't have to work 2 jobs to go to grammar school or convent and so on, then literally you have no excuse not to take advantage of that opportunity, that door to success. So I went to the grammar school and I met young fellows, and I can tell you, certainly to myself, it was a whole new vista, a world opening. When we started, we used to take a truck, a Bedford truck. There were the Tavernier brothers from Portsmouth who would leave Portsmouth at 3 o'clock a.m. And the Coastal Road was not present then. And they would drive through Marigot, and there was one notorious, at Blenheim, and they would go up that hill, and the trucks would race each other, and we would be besieged by the smell of the gasoline or diesel, and some of that. It made many of us young students sick. And this is how we would be transported to the Dominica Grammar School hostel. It was in my day. It was governed by a member of the Robinson family from Marigot, and at that school, I ceased to be someone from Portsmouth, and I became a Dominican student because there were students from Marigot, from Wesley, from Bacatel, from Calabishi, and some students were given names. The student from Bacatel was just called Bacatel. From Calabishi, the same thing. There was one from Tatani, he was called King Size. I'm not sure about the King Size, but I think his pants was always 2 sizes too big. Wow. We went to the Dominica Grammar School, and there you were in first form, and it's only then, I can tell you, that you inexorably you became aware of some of the distinctions. You became aware of some of the subtle distinctions in school, because inevitably you became aware that some of the Rosa students receive a little special treatment from some of the teachers. You see? Initially, it was not something that you observed, but inevitably you did it. But what was so wonderful about the grammar school experience is that those who excelled in my generation were not necessarily students from Roseau. I mean, I can call names of some of the brilliant students I worked with, because inevitably I was inspired by them, all consciously. I mean, there were people like one called Milton Lawrence, who's now a retired financial guru. He was from Dodan, for God's sakes. There were the Joseph brothers, the Joseph twins from Vacaz, Philbert and Philip. There's people like Calix Davis, George Browning, who became a doctor, Ashton Deloney, who became a doctor. Well, he's now a lawyer, actually, in New York. There was a whole host of students who were extremely talented and who, quite frankly, force you to try to do better, just to keep up. I kind of struggled because up to fifth form, I still didn't realize that egg was spelled E-double-G as opposed to E-G. But, as I said, you learned from these folk, and everybody's fighting for the same thing. You know, you are fighting to do well in the Cambridge examinations. Now it's 6 or whatever it is. And then afterwards, if you do well enough, to go to the sixth form college. And you were motivated by this one thought: your parents cannot afford to pay to send you to school beyond the grammar school or the convent high school. So if you do, it's either on account of the fact that you probably have relatives in England or the United States or Canada, or somehow, there's land to be sold to enable you to go study and so on. So once you reach at that level, you became caught up. Now, potentially speaking, there was one phenomenon which almost aborted whatever dreams and hopes and aspirations I had. First of all, it was the Black Power movement and the dread phenomenon which followed in its wake by on about 1994, when I was in the fifth form college. And the whole dread phenomenon obviously took Dominica by storm, imported from Jamaica and so on. And many young men, as you know, gravitated towards growing dreadlocks and washing the hair with what's the name again, the cactus, and so on and so forth. And but again, and we lived in Franklin Lane, which is just next to the hospital, and a few of my persons I grew up with gravitated towards that. But my father made it clear to all his children. There were 5 boys. He said 5 and 2 girls. Anyone who wants to grow dreadlocks, they're free to do so. But as soon as you start to grow dreadlocks, you better find another place to live. Now, I surveyed my landscape and I asked myself, where am I going to live, Gasso, if I decided to grow dreadlocks? Under which tree am I going to shelter? Where am I going to get a tent? So I towed the line. But by then I was very much influenced by the whole question of the future. In Curacao, my father read voraciously. He submitted to Reader's Digest. You may recall, Nigel, although you might be a little too young, probably Ivona, that there was a bookstore in the middle of Roseau by this Kazimi, who became the leader of
CB's bookstore.
CB's, as you know, Mr. Kazimi was also someone who spent time in Curacao. It's only when he returned, as so many of the returnees from Curacao, he opened a business. And he would order Reader's Digest, the Time magazines. And because they were friends going back to Curacao, every month we would go to CB's, and my father would subscribe to the Time magazine and Reader's Digest. So by the time my father came back to Curacao, and by the time we moved to Goodwood, my father had a collection of about 500 books, history, philosophy, you name it, and periodically Dominicans who used to be in Curacao would come home. And after a few drinks of milk of magnesia, my father would engage them. You can laugh if you want, Nigel, that's your business. He would engage them in a debate. So there was I, sitting on a porch typically on Sundays, sometimes with the music blaring loudly. I'm looking around to say which neighbor is going to stick her head or his head out of a window and said, turn it down. But he didn't mind. It was loud. And sometimes he would engage those persons in debates. And that rubbed off on me, to be quite honest with you, because in our lane we had quite a few folks. The Pears, the Jean Pears, Ashton Deloney lived there. A very talented young fellow called John Benoit, one of my contemporaries. He was one of the few persons in the lane who grew his dreadlocks. A very talented musician. Unfortunately, he passed some time ago. But we would assemble under a lamppost just in front of our house at a domino table. And between games of domino, between little gulps of a cheap red wine from Guyana we would call vampire wine, we would debate each other on myriad topics and even social issues. Because one of the positive effects of the Black Power movement, it engendered a series of debates, and it sensitized our generation. It must have sensitized you, Nigel, given some of the social themes you dealt with in some of your plays. But it engendered a social consciousness, which perhaps is conspicuous by its absence today. And even at the sixth form college, well, first in the grammar school, I excelled in things like English and history, under the tutelage of people like Dr. K. Polidor, may her soul rest in peace, Miss Josephine Josephs, brilliant teacher, quite frankly. And later in the sixth form, obviously Alwyn Bully, and then Mrs. Levy. I gravitated towards that activity. In 1975, I started writing. The Chronicle made a mistake of having a competition regarding essays, and each winning essay the person would be given $25 and so on, and the second $15 and the third $10, and I won a few prizes. And when I was told that they find that somebody, I've won 2 or 3, I would write and give it to one of my friends. I wouldn't tell you the name of that person, may his soul rest in peace, and he would submit it under his name. And when he won, we would share the bread, to use a colloquial expression. But again, there was an intellectual curiosity and an intellectual thing, and one of the things that engendered that kind of learning, that kind of consciousness raising atmosphere and context was the sixth form, not so much the sixth form, the extramural department then under stewardship of Bernard Wilshire, because Bernard Wilshire had imported hundreds of books on politics, Marxism, Leninism, things that we never knew about. Well, certainly not I anyway. We got to know about leaders such as Amilcar Cabral, obviously Martin and Mandela, and Nkrumah, and there were books galore. So we immersed ourselves in that intellectual ferment, and I think that it certainly played a significant role in my intellectual upbringing. Because let's face it, by the time I was in sixth form college, studying advanced literature, history, and economics, there was a dearth of books, research material. The library was not what it is today. And there was a reserve section, and there were books that were available to us, but not to the extent that we should have had doing these courses at advanced levels. So we would literally forage, Nigel, through the various institutions. We would go to the convent high school, which had a good collection of books, under the wary eyes of the nuns. So every time the sister, mother superior, whatever name, approached, just to make her know that I was a devout student, interested only in the books, as opposed to the other students of the opposite sex, I made the sign of the cross. And we had to literally go through the convent high school, the grammar school, looking for books on literature, on critics, and so on and so forth. And it's only when I ended up at the UWI in Jamaica and I saw the wealth, the oasis of works that they had of literature, academic materials to enable you to sharpen your intellectual skills, I realized the disadvantage under which we struggle to succeed. But isn't there a biblical admonition that, quite frankly, regardless of the limited amount of fruit that you have, as long as you sow it on fertile soil, then it will bring harvest. So that is the lesson that I learned, that, quite frankly, growing up in Dominica with all its shortages, with its limitations, developed my hunger. I'm not talking about hunger for back and neck, Nigel. I'm talking about hunger for education. So that by the time we ended up, a few of my colleagues, at the UWI at Mona in 1978, and I was exposed to the library in Jamaica, I knew that my journey has now started. I have had the perfect foundation to take the fullest advantage of that bounty that I was privileged to be placed into. Now, I did say that I did teach at the St. Mary's. I did 2 stints of teaching. After sixth form, we did the sixth form, a number of students and so on. We did the advanced level in 77. I was fortunate to have gotten 3 of the subjects under what was called the general paper. And I was looking for a job because I wanted to put myself in the best position where I could get a scholarship. I blundered into the St. Mary's Academy, interviewed by Brother Jermaine. I remember Brother Jermaine telling me, or making it a point, that I didn't attend the St. Mary's Academy. So I told him, well, I'm paraphrasing the interview, but I basically conveyed to him, Gasol, you give me a break now, you know. Fortunately, he didn't ask me to quote scripture. But I think between himself and Mr. Sarondo, who was then a distinguished teacher at the school, they took a chance and gave a job to this heathen because he didn't attend the St. Mary's Academy. And I taught for 1 year in that initial phase. I taught history, geography, and some other subjects. And it was a great experience. And then after 1 year, I had applied for a scholarship, and I got a USAID scholarship. And I must say that thanks to Brother Jermaine and the folks at the St. Mary's, I was given a scholarship to study geography. But Gasso, I knew nothing about geography. So I went to the University of the West Indies, and they told me, you are in the humanities. I said, you're right, I'm a human, so thank you for putting me in the humanities, faculty of humanities. So I enlisted. I said I want to do English, history, and philosophy. There was a former teacher at the school, Hodge Oliver, brilliant fellow, very strong, brilliant athlete too. I should tell you that at UWI, I honed my skills, all 125 pounds of them, to become a long-distance runner at the school, because going to Jamaica was a very existential, almost an existential experience. You know, the Jamaican culture is very in your face. It is infused with superiority. It is infused with a kind of assertive kind of behavior. It is infused with other things, but I'm not going to go there. So you became aware of the perceptions of some of the other islanders towards you. The Trinidadians kept to themselves. On Friday nights, they drank Johnny Walker Black because Trinidad was suffused with oil wealth. The Jamaicans wanted to know how many donkeys existed in Dominica. The Bajans, well, that's another story. They had their own notions of themselves in the Caribbean universe. I'm putting it as nicely as I can. But suffice it to say, you became aware of the fact that irrespective of narratives about Caribbean unity and so on, a hierarchy had been established. You were part of the lower end of that hierarchy. So it became important and imperative to me. I should tell you that even the way we got to the UWI was itself a story in itself. Hodge Oliver and myself, we arrived at Mona campus 1 month after school had started.
Wow.
Well, there was a mix-up. Well, we were told there was a mix-up, but things have a habit of working out. And that is why, frankly, in life, you should say that anytime you're faced with what appears to be a disadvantage, a difficulty, you should look at the rainbow behind that difficulty. Because when we boarded the plane, I think we took it I think it was Barbados, to go to Jamaica. Of all places, we were asked to sit. We sat next to a gentleman. We didn't know him from Adam, well suited and so on. I'm in my little khaki shirt jack. I don't know who made it for me, but a little khaki shirt. I know a suit. Where the hell am I getting a suit? So he engaged us in conversation, only to find that this guy was a gentleman named, he was a Pro-Vice Chancellor of the university called Pro-Vice Chancellor Robinson, former mathematics professor.
Oh.
And he engaged us and wanted to find out why are we, and he asked us, and we explained we're going to UWI. And he was saying, that they've had a problem with Dominica. Many awards have been given to the Ministry of Education for students eligible to attend the university, and they typically received the reply that there was no one qualified. So we arrived 1 month later, and Pro-Vice Chancellor Robinson, the guy had a limousine. I've never been to a limousine. I mean, what the hell do I know about limousine? So he actually took us in his limousine to the Irving Hall, Mona campus, in Jamaica. So we arrived in style, but our jubilation was short-lived, because they had a tradition on the halls of campus that they would give you an initiation. And it wasn't some fancy meal and some nice wine or something. They made us go through the showers with the clothes we arrived on in Jamaica. And my co-traveler Hodge was quite upset about the experience, but by then some of Dominican students had already found themselves on campus, particularly, my memory serves me right, George Bruni, and I also met Dr. Hazel Shillingford, famed Dominican eye specialist, and so on. And I remember George Bruni telling us, "Garçon, just take it, don't make noise. Just take your licks in peace." So we went through the initiation, but I had to hit the university running. I remember there was a tutor in the English, and they had done a book, and we were asked to do a review. I didn't attend not one tutorial. There's about 30 students. And I did my review based on my review of some of the literature about the books at the Mona, Kansas Library, and we submitted. And 2 weeks or 3 weeks after we arrived, she had a tutorial on the reviews, and the only one she talked about was that of Irving André. And it gave me a sense that, look, There is nothing to be afraid of. Be not afraid. You are in a space where, irrespective of your limited experience, your limited exposure, if you are given the resources, if you are asked to compete on a level playing field, you have nothing to fear. And my journey started with that humble tutorial. Suffice it to say, I never looked back, because I was haunted with one goal, that after I'm finished my undergraduate studies, I have to put myself in an intellectual space where I am given the wherewithal to continue. And that was the one way, in one sentence, define my experience in Jamaica. Wonderful experience, interacted with many students, met many students, but it was an avenue to pursue greater work and hopefully to make a contribution. It's one thing I forgot to mention. I was bonded for 5 years by the Youth Junior Child's Administration. Well, actually, that's not even true. I was bonded. It was then the John administration, because I went in 78. And with the expectation that upon completion of the degree, I would come back and work 5 years, which was fine with me. You could bond me for 10 years. It's okay, as long as I get the opportunity. So the University of the West Indies, wonderful experience, wonderful professors. There was two brilliant English teachers. One is a poet of great renown, Mervyn Morris. In fact, years after I invited him, I contacted Alec Lazar to invite him to be one of the guests, our literary festival in August. I don't know if it's still being held. In fact, he came twice. And another one was Dr. Eddie Bowe, brilliant Jamaican fellow, a specialist in plays, quite frankly. And I had occasion to go to Jamaica 5-6 years ago to receive an award from the university, and he was there, and he was very, very happy to see me because he remembered who I was. But a cadre of West Indian students, teachers, were students from all over, and there you are pitting whatever skills you have against them, and showing them that you can hold your own, irrespective of whatever notions of superiority that they have. So this is, in my view, this is the kind of paradigm that we should adhere to when we try to reach our younger students. That you have talents, you have experiences, you have attitudes, hopefully, that if you allow them to blossom, if you bring them to fruition, you can hold your own in any environment. I bet you in the United States, and as an aside, the folks in the United States have somewhat of a superior complex. They think they know everything about everywhere else until you ask them a question or two, and then you realize they know nothing beyond the United States. Some of them don't even know much about the United States. So there is nothing as liberating and as redemptive as education and working to your fullest potential. And in my view, these are the qualities and values that we should seek to inculcate in Dominica. That you shouldn't, quite frankly, and some West Indians, as you know, they disclaim their Dominican heritage. You shouldn't be ashamed of it. It should mean something to you. It should mean something to you that, irrespective of those limited resources that you had to contend with, they gave you a thirst and a desire and a hunger for more. And at no time is education, Ivona or Francis, easier than it is today. You have in fact, it's become even easier in the post-Maria situation, because many institutions have moved to electronic teaching, lectures and tutorials by Zoom. Before the COVID, when you told me Zoom, I would look to see which car just passed me by. Now it's an important avenue of learning. Now, I don't know to what extent has it had an ameliorating effect on the cost of education. But when you combine that with the internet, how easier can it be? Now, it's also the worst of times, because it has exposed our young students to very negative influences. And I don't want to go too far into that and so on. But we have to pass on that message that you have to unlock that key to your success, the key that you've forgotten about because it's buried deep within. I'm not talking about the key to that nice car like Ivona John Baptist, like the one she has. I'm not talking about the key to that wonderful gated community that you live. The key of the potential within. That is what we have to use to unlock what is inside. And that is what our young children should be aspiring to.
Nigel Francis, wow. It is more than the depth of his knowledge. It's more like the breadth of his knowledge. And the way he speaks, Nigel, I'm looking at the comments on Facebook, Nigel. It's a lot. But let me just say this one from C-Sport. She's saying, I'm enjoying the descriptive historical imagery being created about our town. And she speaks, of course, Portsmouth. And she says, my mom carried bananas in Longhouse, and she is here listening as well. This is profound, Nigel.
It is. And I think the wonderful thing about it is the way in which the journey is being spoken about, and the way it's being captured, in a sense that we can see a nice progression from Teacher Rosette School in Portsmouth to Portsmouth, the government school there, and then of course grammar school. I'll say grammar school.
Dominic Grammar School.
And then sixth form college at the time, extramural departments, and then SMA teaching there. You also taught English at the SMA for a while, right, Irving?
You're absolutely correct. And again, like I said, it was a great experience for me. I met some really great people over there. I developed a great respect for teachers, Brother Jermaine, Brother John Lewis, who is now Monsignor John Lewis, Rupert Sarando. There were others. Jolly was there too. LeBron, a young man called LeBron, Cuthbert Elwin, Heather. She was then Heather Elwin, but I think she's now Heather some
Toulon.
That's
Heather
right.
Toulon, yeah.
And what was ameliorating about the experience of the SMA, they had an extramural program after hours, and they would give classes, and you would have students. I should indicate that before I actually moved on to the sixth form, I did extra classes at Ed St. Mary's Academy, and it was a hive of activity. You had the basketball court, young folks trying to learn basketball. You have young persons coming to the SMA after work to beef up or bolster their qualifications. I can tell you that with a young fellow from Wesley called Smiley Burnett and I, we started our own little school for young persons who were working, not at school, but who were working, who for one reason or the other hadn't gone through the ordinary levels. And we organized the school. I think the students were paying $5 a month. You understand why I'm so rich today? They were paid $5 a month. And we hired a couple of teachers, and we did our teaching courtesy of the brothers, of Brother Jermaine, right at the school, teaching commerce, accounts, English. As you said, I taught English at the St. Mary's Academy. There are a number of brilliant students I met at the SMA. And I remember telling them before the Cambridge that every one of you can pass the exam. But is every one of you prepared to make the sacrifice to pass the exam? Is every one of you prepared to do a mock exam for 8 weeks before the Cambridge examinations? I will correct it. And if you are prepared to do that exams over and over and over again, you are guaranteed to pass. And I think that year, for the first time, I think about 80% of the students passed the exam compared to about 30 or 45% before. But again, it's a question of realizing your potential. Look, I'm not here to convince you how smart I am. I mean, I'm not going to fool you. I was just probably a little hungrier than most students because I had a vision which many students lack. I asked myself, where am I going to be in 10 years' time? What do I want to do? What do I want to be? What do I have to do? I am up to the test of making the sacrifice. You see, many of my colleagues, not many, but quite a few, opted for getting jobs in the civil service, and others, there's nothing like feeling the comfort of dollars in your pants. But I decided that I had to put that aside. I decided that there were goals which, if pursued and if achieved, would ensure significant dividends in the future. But isn't that what success is all about? Making sacrifices today to enable you to reap the benefits of the sweat of whatever brow that you have in the future. And it seems to me that is what Dominica was built on. And that is what we should ensure continues, quite frankly, to govern the lives of Dominicans, both at home and abroad.
Wow, Nigel, there's a message from Daryl André.
Oh.
Daryl André and I worked together at Voice of the Islands for about 4 years together. I'm not sure where he is now, but he's saying, Vona, coming from Portsmouth, I am especially pleased at the way Dr. André is describing my wonderful town. Please do not stop his flow, but certainly thank him for me when the opportunity is ideal. So
thank you, Daryl.
Nigel, I tell you, I mean, I'm looking at the time. I don't know where it's going, Nigel. Seriously, I don't know.
I know.
But let me just ask, though, Dr. André, you have inspired a lot of people. But who inspires you? Whose story do you look to for inspiration during your dark days? That's if you have dark days, of course.
You'd be surprised. I have dark days like everybody else, my friend. Because every journey of success, relative success, has been achieved through sacrifice. And in life, whether you live in beautiful, scenic Florida with Governor Santos breathing down your neck and having a guillotine over your head, or whether you make your living in this wonderful office with green, lush green as a background suggestive of the richness of the soil and of the country, you have to be motivated. You are motivated by something. Francis said something is absolutely correct. No man is an island. Success is not achieved only and solely by the breadth of by your efforts. I can indicate to you, as I said, I mean, I was fortunate because you don't buy your parents at Astafans. But I was fortunate, as I said, to have parents. My father had a great interest in books, in learning, but he never had the opportunity to go to university. And I was motivated by the fact that in the 70s in particular after I understood his own personal history more than I knew, I resolved that this will not happen to me. The fact that he was a so-called outside child, and I was not, but I would not allow anyone to impede my progress for any reason whatsoever. That's very important. So I was motivated initially by my parents, by my teachers, motivated by those students I was fortunate to have been in the Dominica Grammar School, brilliant fellows from the country. Because bear in mind that then we thought that if you come from the country, you're not quite up to it intellectually. Bear in mind that many persons were deprived of scholarships because they were from the country. And it's only in the 70s I got a better understanding of this, particularly when I went to the sixth form college and when I was exposed to the literature and the rhetoric and the narratives of black power and black empowerment and books and West Indian history. And I realized that there are avenues out there, that there's a heritage out there that I should not allow to pass through my fingers. And many of you, probably more Nigel than Ivona, because he's 6 months older than Ivona, that in the 70s in particular, there was a famous poem, don't ask me who wrote it. It was called The Desiderata. And it goes, some of the lines went, you are one of the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. You are no less than the trees of the night. You have a right. No less than the trees and the stars. You have a right
precisely. To be here. Go placidly and meet the noise
and
hiss.
Go placidly. But I didn't want to go placidly anyway, Gasson. I wanted to be very assertive in what I felt was my heritage. To defeat or to destroy those shackles, unconscious and invisible sometimes shackles, which unfortunately kept back so many of our generation, those who came from poor families, those who did not have families to help them to go to St. Martin and so on. Many escaped those bounds, either through the U.S. Army, through migration, assistance from family, but many others who could have made significant contributions did not. And it seems to me that I had an obligation to make as much as possible of whatever skills the gentleman up there has given me. And I felt that I will not have, Nike's, their motto is, is just do it. You have no excuses. And that's how I felt. I have no excuses. So don't come and tell me about, okay, boy, my mother don't like me, guys. So I could have done if my father had given me a 10 cents to buy some bakes. Or if it helped me more. We should try to move away from creating or manufacturing or fabricating excuses to explain why we didn't do A, B, or C. The fundamental question we should always ask ourselves is, do we have the guts to make the sacrifice to achieve it? Huh? Do you have the guts? If you want to go to law school, nothing can be easier today than it is. Nothing can be easier today than that dream if it existed 15, 20 years ago. You can do 2 years right here without living in Dominica. Even if you enroll in a school in England, you can do so. I'm not saying that something worth having is easy to attain. On the contrary, the more desirable it is in terms of attaining those dreams, the more effort has to be made. And that is the question. Are we prepared to do what it takes to have this blossom of success, which lies right at our grasp? Or are we prepared to be defined by someone else? You are a hewler of wood or a drawer of water. You cannot achieve too much. And bear in mind, I don't know about Ivona. She's younger. But when we grew up, the overarching perception was that only a few should enter the portals of the Dominica Grammar School. It's only if you're a certain intellectual level or a social level that you can enter the portals of either the convent or the grammar school. And bear in mind one thing, the Wesley High School was generally acknowledged or thought of to be lesser, not as attractive as the convent high school in terms of students. And invariably, disproportionately, the school, at least in my time, was known to be a school where the children from the country went when they were not quite up to par. But as you liberate yourselves from mental slavery, you realize that, quite frankly, these are artificial barriers created by colonialism or the perceptions of persons who, quite frankly, don't have a full interest in giving every student, irrespective of his or her background, an opportunity to succeed. And we have to defy those opportunities. Those people like Nigel and so on who live in the States, they have to contend with microaggressions, with subtle racial discrimination virtually on a daily basis. And the purpose of those microaggressions, which the scholars refer to it, is to keep you in your place, is to make sure that you don't threaten the hierarchy. And so that you have the extraordinary phenomenon in the States in many companies and so on. You're nice. The overarching influence of white privilege. Everybody tells you how good you do your job. But when it comes to promotion, disproportionately, not always, disproportionately, you are overlooked. Why is it so? You think God in his divine wisdom meant that you should only aspire to a certain level? And that's why we have to continue to push the envelope. And right now, we talk about education and so on. The good thing, which I found out at UWI, and in my subsequent education experiences in the United States, I was fortunate to have gotten a scholarship to go to Johns Hopkins to do a doctorate in history. I bailed out 2 years after, and I went to Canada, where I first did a law degree, then I worked and blah, 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 and I did 2 more degrees, and then I was appointed to the bench. To a point that I now sport the gray, not the green grass of home, but the gray grass of my hair. You see? But I did what it takes. I did what was required. And again, my journey is not exceptional. My journey should be typical. Because I don't stand before you as a Pharisee, modern day Pharisee, proclaiming my superiority in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I'm a humble pilgrim in terms of educational and academic success. If you are hungry enough, today, 2023, as opposed to 1978, there is no impediment that is too great to stop you from achieving what you set out to do. That is my basic philosophy.
Wow, Nigel.
Love it.
Wow, this is a lot, Nigel. This is a lot. I am so happy that we got Justice Dr. Irving André on the program this morning. I just wish we had so much more time. But Dr. André, let me ask you, how do you, because you're very busy, you're a writer, you have written so many books, how do you maneuver the overlap between private life and work?
Great question, quite frankly, and one of the reasons I became a judge in 2002 was that the pressures of private practice was basically taking a toll on my family life. And I decided that, look, I mean, I've achieved the goals that I had set out myself in private practice. I was in private practice for 9 years, and before that I was an assistant crown attorney for 3 years, specialized in criminal law. But there are many other things that I could achieve. While on that bench, and it was an exclusively a criminal bench, as I said, I went back to school. I did a master's and a PhD. I was able to do it. I think no other judge had done that while sitting on the bench. But I didn't want to be judged by other judges. The fact of the matter is, I felt that I had to have an edge. And Nigel knows about those things. You have to be a little more qualified than persons who laugh and smile with you and ask you about your accent. You have to be a little more qualified to get a chance for the promotion that you seek. And that was one of the motivations. Not only that, but I had 2 daughters. And I felt that, we grew up with the belief that example is greater than 1,000 lectures. So when they saw an old fat like me studying, and by the time I did the degrees, the postgraduate degrees, everything was on the internet. All our research engines, legal research engines, was on the internet. I did it at home because I could do it at home. All the materials, I had to attend lectures personally from 7 to 10 every 2 or 3 nights a week because I was still working full time. But again, the sense of purpose. And I wanted my daughters to believe or to understand that old fat of a husband that they have, he's still studying. He's still studying. It didn't increase my salary. But I left Johns Hopkins without finishing a PhD in history. And I felt that there was unfinished business. And I had to make them understand that education is the be-all and end-all of everything. A happy life. I'm not suggesting to you that education necessarily brings happiness, but it enhances you to achieve that happiness, because if it gives you a kind of intellectual and internal comfort, then that is a precondition for happiness in your own life. Now, obviously, you aspire to have a husband who will treat you as nice as I want a husband treats her, and so on. That's good. But statistically, 50% of marriage ended in divorce. You want to put yourself in a space, man, woman, or whoever it is, that you can at least enjoy the comforts of the life you envision for yourself on the strength of your efforts as an individual. That is a message, quite frankly. There's nothing like example to impart that message, even if you pound it into their heads with a tamawe design or with a hammer. So that was the important thing to me. There were opportunities in North America that had never existed in Dominica. Francis lives in Florida. Now I know his governor DeSantis, he wants to drag America back 100 years. But there are all kinds of universities and colleges in Florida. I wanted to learn to cook back a neck, and I just Googled the thing, for God's sakes. I might be exaggerating. But I'm saying never has these things and programs been more accessible than they are today. And we have to make sure that our young people, they realize that they have no excuse, that they have an obligation to take advantage. But not only that, because one of my regrets, here's one of my regrets. I never took the time probably to record my father's own personal history. So I can understand. I know it, but I knew it through what persons had told me about his peculiar and painful experiences because of the circumstances of his own growing up. But I never really interviewed him to get his own personal. But by definition, West Indian men are very undemonstrative in their love. I don't know about you, but I don't know of too many fathers, West Indian naturally, who would speak in loving terms to a son, well, probably a daughter, I don't know, but certainly a son. God, somebody love you like a cow's behind. Or express terms of endearment. It was more, go do this, go do that, read a book in a very commanding and authoritative term. So many of us, by the time we became a little older, we started to rebel against that advice. Not because it was bad advice, but because it had been spoken in imperative language. Go and do this, as opposed to, being exposed to the experience of, and that is what we have to do. We have to literally change the whole paradigm in terms of learning. And we have to make these young folk understand that, look, irrespective of the discrimination, and it exists in spades in the United States, it exists in Canada too, that there is a silver lining out there, and we have to latch on and attach ourselves to that silver lining. Because if we're hungry, and as a general proposition, I don't think that Nigel can contradict me on this. If you look at studies, sociological studies by many academics in the United States, they will tell you that West Indian persons of African origin from the West Indies, they outpace and they outshine their African American counterparts by spades.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that that has in many instances triggered a backlash against West Indians. Because a few African American, they say that West Indians should not reap the benefits that they... Reap what benefit? The fact of the matter is, as a general proposition, we are prepared to take advantage of what exists out there to a greater extent than our African American brothers. And we apologize to nobody for that. Look at any university or universities, whether in any part of America. If you do well, there's money given away. Santa Claus is every day. If you do well, they give you bursaries, they give you scholarships on the strength of your grades, not on the strength of your last name, which is part of our colonial legacy in Dominica. So this is what is so redemptive and ameliorating by the experiences of North America. We cannot become too preoccupied with narratives of discrimination to the detriment of what is positive and what is waiting to be exploited. This is a conversation I had with my two daughters. It's there. You will experience those things, but you are no less than the moon on the stars. You have a right to be there. I told them, you don't speak with an accent, as I do. You were born there, quite frankly. Don't take second fiddle. Don't make anyone consciously or unconsciously shove you into some kind of dead end in terms of employment or opportunity or ambition. You have a right to be here. And don't leave the education of our children exclusively to the teachers. In some environments, the teachers are worse than the person who calls you black. Because consciously or subconsciously, all their efforts are geared to putting you into a space which is inherently unequal. Now I admit that probably this is more of a problem in the United States than in Canada. But don't be fooled. In Canada, it is a lived experience. I've just completed 2 years ago. In fact, I don't know if Nigel saw that book. I'd completed 2 books 2 years ago. And this is not a plug for sales. One is called Distant Voices Revised Edition. And I include a whole chapter with an analysis of the plays of Alwyn Bully, Nigel Francis, who superseded him after Bully went to work in Jamaica. After that, Steve Hyacinth, then the plays of Alex Bruno, to talk about the themes of these folk and so on and so forth. And we have to know about, and I did a book also on Rosie Douglas, I should tell you. And I was happy that last year, Montreal professor, and we know about Rosie's activities going back to 1969 with the burning of the university, and Rosie was scapegoated and jailed and so on.
So that's the biography of Rosie Douglas and the Resurrection of a Nation, I think, something like this?
Yes, yeah. But we have, what happened is that after it was published, and I've never really published it live, I did it by Zoom. And a Montreal fellow, a professor, saw it, contacted me, and invited me if I would be interested in his publisher republishing it, which I agreed after they reviewed it and blah, blah, blah. So we've just about finished the works, what has to be done before it's going to be. It's going to be republished on the 3rd of November, catering to a distinct Canadian audience with significantly more research than the first one. But I would like at some point, probably if Nigel, if he's interested, if he gives his contact information to Ivona, I would send him a copy of The Distant Voices, because there's a separate chapter, not on the 70s, but on the plays and the playwrights of the period. I don't know what's happening on the ground in terms of that type of writing, to be quite frank with you. I know that there has been a significant blossom of poets in Dominica, even post-COVID. In fact, I wrote a few reviews on, there's an academic internet program called academia.edu, academia.edu. And there's been people from all over the globe has accessed some of those things and so on. We have an obligation to get the works of, whether it's Nigel or others, out there. And even Dominicans who are young people of Dominican heritage in the United States, in England, and so on, are finding value in some of those works because, again, there has been a dearth of works. And the question is, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? I mean, I don't know, but who's going to do it? You know, so we have to address this thing. We have to break out of the shackles of any type of innate inferiority that we may have vis-a-vis other islanders. We're no less than the moon and the stars. We have a right to be there, intellectually speaking. And I think that is the challenge for our generation. As I said, I hope to see that those works and other works, they take their rightful place in the cosmology of writers and writings, quite frankly.
Look at the time already. How do you end a program like this, Nigel?
You can end it up with some bakes and titiri. That's fine with me.
Wow, I mean, this is a lot. Nigel, I mean, I'm sure you're looking at some of the comments. A lot of comments, and people are really inspired by this. I'm so happy that we had this. There's another program started at 11 o'clock.
Yep,
we have to go on to now. And Nigel, we need to have another part.
We have to have a part 2 with it.
Because it's always good to document.
We have to because there's so much we have to cover. In terms of the experiences in Canada and when you went there, and you know whether there was a culture shock, but more importantly, what you were able to transpose from your journey, Dominica, Jamaica, and then Canada. So there's so much more we have to cover. There's a lot,
Nigel, and I also know that he documented. I think he did a piece on, or he wrote an article on, I think, on the May 29, 1979 events that really changed the trajectory of the nation. So we want to look at this going forward.
Yes, there's so much we have to look at, So, I mean, Justice André is a pretty busy man, obviously, but I'm pretty sure he will find some way to make some time for us so he can connect with you, Ivona, in terms of when he's available next. Whether it's in studio or Zoom or whatever the case is. Well, for us to continue, because that conversation needs to be continued.
It has to be.
Well, let me thank both of you for having me. When a couple of persons found I was going on DBS, somebody said, "Garçon, but you sure you know what you're getting into?" Somebody threw a little holy water over me, and I said, "Thank you." I made the sign of the cross. But again, we have no difficulty engaging. We're talking about those things. Anything which can enlighten, can impact, can provide some inspiration, we have that obligation. You see, the fact of the matter is that we will always have differences of opinion, but quite frankly, that should not be an impediment to us trying to enlighten and uplift our people. Because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Huh? Who's going to do it? And people, as I said, our history should not be hidden. The younger generation of writers should know. I mean, they already know about many of the poets, people like Arundel, people like Ian Jackson, and a number of others, Lennox Honeychurch, and they know about those things. But they should be able to have an intelligent discussion about the views expressed in those works, what they have learned, or to be inspired by plays that speak not just to the Dominican condition, but the human condition. We have a right to make sure that our writings are projected on the screens of the intellectual world.
Nigel, I'm moved by this. Well, he has to stay around still, because Nigel have a lot of work to show him. I'm going to take my photo, Nigel. You can let that chance pass me by. I know we had a discussion when Felix Henderson was writing his book, and I was
as you know, we did do some work with Felix on the book.
We did some work, so yeah. But we have to leave. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I will leave the place hope.
My apologies there. So I was saying thank you so much, and we'll have a part 2 and the part 3.
Well, as I said, thank you for both. I felt very welcomed, and I certainly enjoyed the discussion, and if I can assist in any way, shape or form, I'd be more than happy to do so.
All right, Nigel, so we'll link up again next week?
We'll link up again, my dear.
We didn't have time to go through the book and all the comments.
Irving. Appreciate it, and we'll keep the connection.
Yeah.
Thank you, and continue writing, my friend. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Ivana.
Thank you.
All right.
Keep on jamming, keep on jamming, keep on jamming. Oh mama, I'm your smile.